Let's see. Good. All right. So, yeah, sometimes when I put my desk in standing up position, that prevents them from coming up, but they're especially energetic today, so I guess not. So anyway, it is still 1 minute to 10. Now it's 10 o'clock. So we should probably begin so that we can get everything we can out of this time that we have together. So I thought, unless anybody has anything else that they want to do right here at the beginning, I thought that we'd sort of begin with introductions and, so that we all know each other a little better and kind of where we're coming from and what type of interest and experience we have, and also, kind of what we hope to get out of this. So I'm Dan Alasso. I teach history at a small regional state university in northern Minnesota, and I'm in a small history department, so I get to teach a lot of different topics, which kind of keeps me interested, and it also sort of keeps me in this process of kind of continually creating courses and updating my notes and things, so that I can be current on a lot of stuff. And what I'm hoping to get out of this is, I read this before, actually. I read it just before RBC2, I think, when Rome did it. Hello, everybody's arriving now. Good. Greetings, everybody. We're doing introductions, and I was starting. So those of you who are coming in now all probably know me anyway, so I won't repeat myself. What I'm hoping to get out of this this time around is a better understanding of what I'm actually doing with permanent notes. I think that I've been doing a pretty decent job sort of collecting information and putting stuff in there that I'm using as kind of building blocks of the things that I'm writing, but I'm not sure that I've really kind of cracked the code on the difference between source notes and permanent notes. And so that's one of the things that I'm sort of focusing on right now. So I will, I guess probably the best way to do this, since we're all in different positions on people's screens, is I will pick the next person. I'll pick Pat, and then Pat, when you're done introducing yourself, why don't you pick the next person, and we'll just continue that way.
Okay, I'm Pat McNamara, and I live in Florida on the East Coast. I'm formerly a chemical engineer by training. Worked for several chemical companies, had a tour of duty in the Air Force, working on rocket propellants, which is a very interesting time. I've used various kinds of personal knowledge management for decades. And what I hope to get out of this is a better understanding of how to use Obsidian better. I'm very impressed by some of the things I've seen already, particularly, I think it was Mr. Martin Lewis. And I look forward to more developments in the Obsidian website that we're sharing. So I'll pick Tor next.
Okay, yeah, so just had to unmute myself. Currently, well, my name is Dr. Ahrens, and I'm in Somerset, England, so onto the side of the pond. And I'm currently a English language and creative writing undergrad with the Open University, currently on my second module. So I'm doing it part-time, so one module a year, so 6 years. And so I'm also very interested in the PKM space and setting up a couple of websites too. So I can start blogging on it and well-being and Web3 as well. And I'm mostly hoping to, I've read the book before, and I was currently on 43% before I knew about this version of the book club. So I'm happy to read it again. And I'm mostly just sort of hoping to get get a better handle of my note taking and note making as well, because I tend to copy too much rather than write it in my own voice, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah,
Especially when I'm trying to take notes for my assignments, which. Yep, and that's me. Okay, and Joe next.
Hi, I'm Joe. Currently, I'm going back for my second master's. It's going to be in nutrition this time. I just got it, previous one, and graduated in May within exercise physiology. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. From my previous master's to the one that I'm going to be going to with the Army, I decided I need to change my way of studying and getting personal knowledge management down, because I realized I can't keep doing the brute force method and trying to memorize as much as I possibly can and not expanding upon my own ideas. Because when I was starting to write my thesis and stuff like that, it was like all over the place and it took forever and I hated every second of it. And I don't want to do that again. So that's when I decided like I need to get into this personal knowledge management space. And then on top of that, especially with the Army and the way they're going, I want to continue on my research and get a PhD. So if I have all these ideas in my head now, I want to keep them saved so I can go back to them and continue building upon that. And that's why I think I like the slip box method, where you can just keep everything written down and have those endless ideas coming back. So when I am in more of a research position, I continue that path and then hopefully produce more papers and ideas and things. So that's what I'm really hoping to get out of this. And I use a whole bunch of personal knowledge management tools. I use Obsidian, I use Drafts, I use Logsec, so I'm trying to figure out a way how I can combine them all together to make a workflow that's more congruent to the way my mind works, because I seem to be all over the place half the time. So it's just like, the more I can keep things saved and useful for the future, I think is the better. So that's why I'm really hoping to get out of this and reading through the books and the papers and all those things. Let's see here. John, let's do you.
Okay, my name is John Wilkins. I'm in Southern California, retired mathematics professor, but I'm teaching history of math online. I've taught history of math for 18 years, and I've got a Devon Think library filled with tons of highlighted notes from all the history books that I've read. But I'm trying to now move that over into the more Zettelkasten kinds of methods so that I can retrieve that. I've also been using Obsidian for quite a while, but I don't think I'm not as fluent with it as I want to be. And I'm trying to think of different ways of arrangement. The map of content is very interesting, but that still makes me think it's a top down, but maybe I really don't understand the map of content. So I'm really curious about those two aspects of Obsidian. So that's why I'm here. All right, up next, Plessy.
Why I'm Here is a song by the American hard rock band Oleander.
I'm an architect. Currently, I live in Kuwait, and I was in part of the previous book club. And in that book club, I just learned how to make what the book calls fleeting notes, but I never learned to make literature notes. And my aim out of this book club, is to try to learn how to make proper literature notes, and if I'm lucky, even how they become permanent notes. That's about it for me. And I propose Jody.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
I'm sorry. Do we have an echo? Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Jody Abney here from a little town called Graniteville, South Carolina. You've never heard of that, I'm very sure, but you probably have heard of Augusta, Georgia, if you know anything about golf. And so I'm about 20 minutes from Augusta, Georgia. And I've never been in any book club before. So it's a brand new experience for me. I'm really looking forward to it. I've never read the book, and I have read I guess a different connotation of it. And John, you might be interested in this from the Devon Think perspective. There actually is a book called How to Take Smart Notes Using Devon Think. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, but I kind of went through that book, and I don't feel like it served me that well necessarily because, it didn't get into the true basics of sorry, my pup here is Benny, by the way. But anyway, I'm looking forward to just, the interaction, the discussion about different methodologies. I've been through, look at that. I've been through Linking Your Thinking by Nick Milo. And that's a very interesting system. And I've definitely been applying parts of it to my own PKM. I've been doing PKM now or trying to do it for a couple of years. But my problem is it maybe is more of one of a workflow type situation where I try to do most of my reading on like a Kindle app, take the highlights, and then I've recently found last year Readwise, and that allows me to get those into Obsidian. But then they just kind of sit there, right? I mean, I've made some attempts at, doing my own internal summaries of books I've read, and I read quite a bit. But I'm just not happy with what I'm ending up with. So I'm hoping maybe I can learn from everyone here and, explore some new ideas. So that's me. And next, why don't we go with maybe Miguel? What about you?
So thanks, Jody. Hi, everyone. Hi, Dan. So I live in Slough in the UK, which is to the west of London. And I've been here for a few years, but I was raised in the US. And my interest here is I'm using Obsidian quite a bit for a bunch of different activities. So at a personal level, at a business level, and a learning level as well, except I still find myself using it more as a warehouse. I do tagging. I still haven't gotten past that barrier of like, how do I make the most out of the tagging? I do linking between notes, and I still haven't gotten past a certain barrier as well with linking and just migrating over to some sort of like a condensation or a joining together of all of these different ideas. I most recently tried to write an article for LinkedIn, which I eventually posted. And I still find myself working in a very longitudinal way, in a very sequential way. And I think I'm not using Obsidian to its greatest extent. So that's my interest. And I'll pass it on to Stan.
Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro. I'm Stan Dunn. I live in Troy, New York. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I have several selfish motivations. One, I guess, is I happen to be a productivity junkie, and I have been for years, going back to I guess it is get the days of getting things done, and back when it was on paper, and Franklin Covey and all those, in all those days. That's, so it's, personal management. It's teaching, teaching it to students, and also, teaching these tools, modern day tools, to students. And if you were with us in the first book club, I was, talking in a last session about, teaching students to write atomic notes long before, long before the Sönke Ahrens book even came out, and the days of Nicholas Luhmann were brought to the fore. And I found myself reading or rereading Sönke Ahrens' book over the past week, and this was the second time that I've been through it. And I found that I had some misconceptions or misreads or misperceptions about the book from the first time. And I guess I think, there's, there may be some misunderstandings out there, and a lot of the YouTube literature, that you'll find. So one thing I'm hoping that might come out of, the work that we do here this month might be, some kind of consensus and tutorial, that could be distributed over, that would describe clearly what a fleeting note, literature note, permanent note is, and what a healthy workflow might be, for the average person. And you'll have to forgive me. I showed up, and I don't know who showed up after me. And Jody, thanks for the, thanks for the note. I don't know if there's, Dan, is there someone who, I know I showed up late.
Why don't we pop over to Simon?
Simon, okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Simon. I'm a New Zealander, but I live in London. Actually, Miguel, not so far from you. I'm in the southwest. I am an artist, a dance artist, a choreographer, and I also work at a university where I supervise a lot of PhD students. So these are students who are working both as practitioners, as artists, but also in kind of more traditional scholarship. So I cross that sort of strange ground between being a practicing artist and a kind of more conventional scholarship, you might say. I've read Ahrens's book before, and I guess I'm here in part because I'm just really curious about how other people manage or struggle or find ways in with dealing with large amounts of information and how to make large amounts of information useful. And that's particularly for me is thinking about different ways of writing, and sometimes long form writing, sometimes short form writing. So yeah, that's me. Lewis, why don't you have a go?
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, my name is Lewis Martin. I'm from the UK. I'm Scottish originally, but I now live in Finland, Helsinki. I'm an architect, and I work here, but I like to read and like to write. So I think I started taking digital notes in Evernote and moved to Bear. And then maybe about 6 months ago, I moved to Obsidian, watching Dan's YouTube channel. and sort of seeing or seeing the promise of like, rather than just having this warehouse of this archive of notes that sometimes you remembered, you put something, you go and you find it, something more that might be able to help you think through new ideas and give new insights. So and that's still proving a little bit kind of maybe not quite, you know, I feel like you can almost get there, but like not quite there yet. The Sönke Ahrens book was actually next up on my reading list. I haven't read it yet. Of course, I've heard about the Zettelkasten system on YouTube videos, and a little bit watching people on YouTube and it explained and reading some reviews, but I haven't actually read the book yet. So this is a great opportunity for me to read the book with sort of fellow travelers in this space. Okay, so maybe it's, what about Chris?
Morning, I'm Chris, and I'm a productivity-aholic. Okay, got one laugh. I don't know, I've read Aaron's book at least once thus far. I've spent an awful lot of time reading and researching into the ideas of memory and mnemonics, both in Western culture and across other world cultures and groups from a historical perspective. And that has kind of led me as well into, particularly into the Middle Ages, ideas of note-taking, going much further back into what I would call the commonplace book tradition. So you'll hear me use words for note-taking that include words other than Zettelkasten, because all this stuff goes back much further than any of our modern writers and productivity specialists are going to talk about or acknowledge. So I'll try and bring a little bit of that perspective to what we're all talking about here. But I feel like I'm kind of a cultural anthropologist from one perspective of seeing and watching how other people do this. I mostly have watched a lot of people start doing what we're talking about and quit because they don't understand and never see the power of what they're doing because they don't do it long enough to see the value of it. So having seen and watched that, I'll try and bring a little bit of that perspective, which I don't see people reading and writing about an awful lot. And having come a few minutes late, I'll take a guess that Nate hasn't gone and see if we can make the next step. Otherwise, we can go to Dan's cat.
Truly the star of the show here. Thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. My name is Nate Martins. I teach English, mainly like freshman college writing classes, and also some research-based classes and some study skills. But at a community college where I work with a lot of students that aren't really certain like what they want their relationship to academia to be. So then it's hard to teach some kind of like comprehensive note-taking because they're not sure like how committed. I really liked what you were saying, Joe, about like the work that you're doing should be work that you can refer to at some point in the future, right? And I think a lot of students fresh out of high school don't understand that. So I'm trying to help them to understand that while also doing PKM stuff and Obsidian stuff for myself to try and be more organized and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks, Dan, for putting this on. And I'll call on Eric.
How did I know that was coming? Hey, everyone. I'm Eric Fenza. I am not in academia. I do website stuff. Let's see, failed grad student in Chicago. but I really like reading. And so I would read, take notes, and then make flashcards. I've got Anki, which is a spaced repetition software that I really loved. And something that they say is just like, oh yeah, put everything in one deck. So you can have these moments of serendipity when you get one flashcard and another that's unrelated, but then you kind of make the connection. So now I have a ton of flashcards that have like a line of note at the bottom of them that's just like, later, look into this, look into that. So that's not really a good medium for actually playing around with these ideas and pursuing different lines of thought. And thank you. Definitely. Yeah. But yeah, so it seems like Zettelkasten and Obsidian is a much better medium for that. Nate has turned me on to that. And so this year I'm trying to really get into it. I'm a complete novice at all this stuff. I downloaded Obsidian like a week ago. So I will be stealing like an artist from all of you. So thank you. And I'm not quite sure who to call yet.
Why don't we go to Tom then?
Excellent. Tom.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon. Maybe I'll miss a good evening if whoever is left at this point. So I'm Tom O'Rourke. I live in New Jersey, so I'm about halfway in between the group here. And I am the head of product for a software company based in Chicago. I spend quite a bit of time traveling, but more relevant to this, I oversee and kind of lead an organization of about 150 people. I have very, very broad responsibilities and, go from, working strategically to working tactically, from paragraph to paragraph at times. Like several others, I've been in the productivity space, looking around for a long time and very, very comfortable with GTD. Rely on OmniFocus and drafts a lot. About 6 months into Obsidian, and my objective with Obsidian, bringing it into this class, is really, I do very, very well with capture. Bringing that to insights is much more difficult, and so like a previous comment, I'm very happy to honor some of your thoughts by stealing them from you and using them elsewhere. This is my first nonfiction book club, and the last book clubs that I was in were high school, so it's been a little bit of a gap along the way. So I'm going to be finding my way through this as I go on how to participate. I'm about halfway through the Smart Notes book, and so far I'm intrigued, but I'm not yet impressed. So I'm looking to find the magic still, but I can definitely start to see the benefits. But I agree, all of these things come with practice, not from reading the book. It comes from going and trying things. And Dan, I think I'm going to pass it back to you because I'm not sure who's left that we haven't gotten to.
Okay, I think we haven't got to Brendan yet, right? Thanks, Tom.
I'm Brendan. I'm from the United States, but I currently live in the Netherlands. So my background is in astronomy, but I currently work as a sort of a software engineer, data science, machine learning person. But what I'm really interested in personal life is philosophy and politics and history and so on and so forth, things that I don't have any formal background in. And so as I'm reading these books and articles and listening to podcasts, I get all of these ideas from all these different sources and things that remind me of something else, and I have no way of figuring out where the heck I got that idea from. And so I was really excited when I found out about Zettelkasten method, because that just seemed to be a very natural way of how my mind works in order to put those things down and learn something about these fields that I don't really know that much about. So yeah, so I've been doing Zettelkasten for a little while, mostly been doing all of that in Obsidian. And I'm mostly doing that for my own interest, but I'm also trying to figure out how to get this working in my work life, because I do some amount of research into like machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I think it could be useful for that. And so what I'm looking to get out of this book club, so I've also never done a book club like this, so I'm finding my way. I've also never read this book, and so I thought this would be a great way to get myself to actually read the book and take notes on it and learn something about how to take notes. And mostly it's that although I've been doing this Zettelkasten, it's a bit of a mess in terms of like where I'm putting files, and I keep going back and reorganizing and changing everything up, and just getting really bogged down in those details. So I'm hoping from this to be able to not get stuck in those details, to not let things be perfect, just move on. And I'm hoping to get a lot of inspiration from seeing how other people approach things, starting from the beginning, and what your workflows are, how you format things, and all of that. Yeah, so I think that's it. Yeah, I'm also not sure who else has not gone yet. So.
Okay, I think we'll go to Justin then.
Hi, everybody. I'm Justin. Currently a software engineer in Silicon Valley. I'm a physicist by training, and I have a lot of diverse interests, similar to many of you that you've mentioned. For the book club, I'm mostly interested in spending the focus time to really try and iterate and make a system that works for me and the way my brain works. So I'm kind of searching for what is working and examining each step along the way to make sure I understand why it's working or which parts are frustrating me and things like that. I am definitely interested in exposure and feedback of ideas from the rest of you, because I'm only one person. There's only so many things I can try at once, but I can definitely get insight and ideas from what you all are trying also. And that kind of goes into like a theme I have this year, which I'm trying to focus on some of the processes in my life so that I can improve them, and rather than like plan out a finished state that is going to work and has been handed to me as the one true way of doing something, I'm kind of chucking that idea and just taking the time to figure out what really works for me, and just do that, even if it's something I've never seen anybody else do. So let's see, I think Asher is left.
Hey all, it's Asher Silverman. I'm also in Southern California. I work in computer security. One thing I want to get out of this is, like I have this big backlog of notes, and I'm trying to like figure out how to update them with like new understandings and like blending these different taxonomies. That's kind of what I'm excited about. And yeah, Chris in here was a big inspiration. I always talk about digital gardens. So I'm also getting more into like the GTD. So I'm hoping to be able to kind of standardize Zettelkasten more, because I always feel like I'm doing something a little different. So I'm just kind of writing down the process, I think would be very helpful. Is there anybody else? Can raise your hand.
Yeah, why don't we go to Greg?
Thanks. All right, Greg.
Okay, great, thanks. My name's Gregory Silverman also, and I'm coming to you from outside of Seattle. I'm a law professor at Seattle University School of Law, the faculty director of the Center for Indian Law and Policy, and a tribal judge. And, I've been sort of casually looking into Zettelkasten for about 1.5 to 2 years. I first read the book, we're going to read together, about 1.5 years ago. I've also read the book Jody mentioned, because I've been using DevonThink for years, right? Taking smart notes with DevonThink. I've read Schmidt's article on Luhmann, about 1 year ago. And I've been using Obsidian now, for a while, but, to try to really master it, I went through Nick Milo's flight school that he released a little before Christmas, right? what I'm hoping to get out of the book club is, I've had a number of false starts, is the way I would characterize it. So I'm really interested in trying to nail down or master or workable, a workflow, as well as sort of just figure out finally how to, organize, especially the permanent notes within a Zettelkasten. My two challenges, I think, have been, although conceptually I understand the whole idea of bottom up and letting the order emerge, I find that every time I kind of start, top-down topics tend to sneak into the organization. And so to really keep it purely bottom up has been difficult for me after a lifetime maybe of hierarchical thinking, right? And the other challenge is, how to capture the development of an argument, a line of thinking in the notes. And I've spent, too many hours actually looking at Luhmann's digital archive of his Zettelkasten decoding his numbering system. And I'd like to sort of sort out that issue once and for all. Do we need a Luhmannesque numbering system? Or as is more popular on the internet today, do we rely simply on kind of WikiLeaks connections, right? It seems to me that's, a pretty controversial issue, I suppose, in the Zettelkasten community that I'd like to finally get a handle on. And I think that might help me finally figure out how to organize the permanent notes. And last point that I'll say that this year in the fall, inspired by Dan's work with his history students, I did introduce my 1Ls, my first year law students, to Obsidian and the concept of a Zettelkasten. And I will say more than I expected, really got excited about the idea. And I posted the reference to the book we're reading, and some of them actually read it. And so anyhow, thank you, Dan, for that inspiration. So.
Okay, and Mark, I think you are up now. I think that is it. I think you're our closer.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Wilson. I'm in Whittier, California, just east of East Los Angeles. And former scientific glassblower. I spent 20 years in Santa Clara, California, which some people call Silicon Valley. I prefer Valley of Heart's Delight, the earlier term, but all the fruit trees are gone, so I guess we can't say that anymore. I returned to school after 2008, so now I have a sociology degree, and I'm really interested in lifetime learning, adult education, degree completion, that type of thing. So I come at this from e-portfolios and digital humanities. I train both faculty and students on the Google Workspace, formerly G Suite for education. That's how I spend some of my time. But I'm really interested in PKM and all these different approaches. I'm still a terrible student, so I'd really like to up my game so I can keep going. And that's about it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody has introduced themselves now. Am I correct? Okay, then great, good. So a couple of things. I was writing down some notes as people were sort of identifying kind of what they were interested in and what their topics might be. Stan, the sort of misperceptions about Ahrens, I think I am noticing more of them this time as I'm kind of going through the ideas of kind of warehousing and maps of content and tags versus folders and linking, I think are things that will be kind of be central to this. Yeah, the idea of kind of scaffolding. Chris, I was interested when you were describing, the things that you brought to the previous to the previous book club about sort of the ways that these external tools work or don't work. I'm not sure where that tweet is coming from. It might be a good idea for folks to mute their mics when they're not talking, if you don't mind. Yeah, the idea of the numbering system, of kind of maintaining the bottom up versus the top down thing, I think will be are interesting issues that I think are quite relevant to sort of the broader talk that the conversation that people are having in Discord and on Twitter and on YouTube and other places. I thought that in the rest of the time that we had, we could sort of split. Generally, I think I'd like in these meetings for us to split our time between discussing the takeaways from the chapters that we're reading each week, and then the articles at the end, and then also sort of the applications to. Oh, thanks, Pat. The applications to the work that we're doing, and specifically, as Justin was saying, kind of tuning it to our own processes. And maybe there are some differences between, working with this in a legal format and working with it in a historical format and working with it in a, I'm planning on writing an article kind of a perspective. So I think that will be interesting to sort of bring to the fore. The things that I was thinking about, or the questions that I thought we might address as we're looking at these initial chapters are things like how successfully or not do we think Ahrens was in kind of making this case for the Zettelkasten system or the slipbox. Did he explain the system in a useful way or in a useful enough way? Is he missing, or is he unclear about some elements that maybe we could actually kind of nail down in a way that he didn't do, so that it would be more useful, Stan, for your students, or for me for my students? I'm hoping to sort of bolt it onto the front end of a writing handbook that I use with them already. Can we come to a consensus, and would it be useful to see the differences in the ways we each understand things like fleeting notes and literature notes and permanent notes and the processes around them? And then, and I guess my interest in this again sort of goes back to this, what will we add if we were, if we were improving on this text for our own use, and and for those of us who have students as well. So where do we want to start? Anybody want to begin with kind of general impressions? Go ahead, Justin.
My general impression so far is about 50% of the text could probably be thrown away, but that seems like I have a self-published version, so maybe he didn't hire an editor that was aggressive enough before getting it out the door.
Well, is there a fully published version? I was surprised. I only bought this as a Kindle, and then when I actually saw the other version, yeah, it's a self-published book, I believe. I think he published it through CreateSpace, so maybe he didn't actually have editorial help.
Well, he could have hired an editor just for himself. I mean, there are surprisingly few typos. I've only found one. A potato coach is the one I spotted, which I thought was kind of hilarious. But no, let's see. The one thing I wanted to say was I think there's a distinction between the note-taking you would do for a course where you're trying to actually learn material for a test and things like that, versus when you're considering figuring out what your research interests are and really focusing on only capturing the things that you're interested in. You don't want to clutter up your permanent notes with a giant catalog of all the things you needed to learn for a particular project specifically. And that was not something that I noticed until, I don't know, chapter 8, I think, is when that kind of idea occurred to me, which is pretty late for that kind of distinction in the system you're building.
Yeah, so maybe an additional, it would be helpful to distinguish between those two things. Note taking for courses, note taking for, he does sort of disparage the idea of, and he seemed to be, when he was doing it, he seemed to be sort of channeling the new pedagogical, stuff on spaced repetition and retrieval practice and that sort of thing, right? But yeah, but maybe there is a distinction that we should make between the type of student work that students are doing and kind of the more permanent work. Yeah, I think most of us here are sort of interested for our own purposes in that more permanent side of it. Am I right in that thought? Okay. Other initial impressions of Ahrens and his enthusiasm and the case that he makes and the things that maybe he leaves out.
I'm not exactly sure if linking is well described. He talks about the emergence of ideas that Luhmann was gathering, and I'm whenever you see examples of how Luhmann linked his notes together, it was this intricate, 1A, 1A1, that kind of thing. But it's never explained how he actually figured out where a new note would go. I mean, I know he has this index system, but the index system, I'm sure, would be just whole numbers. So that might get him a category, but I don't think that's fully explained. And then with, of course, computerized note-taking, what are the best ways of linking these things together? And do you do it at all stages from fleeting up to permanent, or do you wait till permanent?
Okay, Brendan, go ahead. You got an immediate reaction to that.
Yeah, it was a bit of a general impression, but also what you're just talking about with the indexing method and how Luhmann was linking notes together. Before reading this book, my understanding of the Zettelkasten method has really only come from what people have written or talked about online. And a very common sentiment I see is that, well, the only reason Luhmann had this complicated indexing system was because he was using note cards and he needed some way to find what he was looking for. But what seems to be argued in this book, and then it's almost, the idea is almost immediately thrown away, is that this indexing system was actually a way of making these chains of thought. And then, like, right after he explains that that's how it was, then he says, but you don't need to do that. You can just use a random ID. And so I think that there is something very crucial that indexing method creates that is lost by getting rid of it. And that's that there's, or it seems to me that there's really two ways in which things are linked together. There's a bit of a hierarchical, one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, and branching out into other thoughts. And then there's also a bit more of a loose web that then connects each of those branches together. And I think a lot of the ways that people, or at least implementations that I've seen from people online, is that it ends up being this very sparse, or I'm sorry, other way around, this very dense web of loosely related ideas versus Luhmann's, which seemed a lot more sparse but structured and purposeful. So fewer links, but much more stronger links.
Yeah, and that idea of the insertion point does seem to be really relevant. And that's the thing that I was missing, I think, in my own work was actually choosing a place to put my thought that was already related to a train of thought that I was already having. Miguel, you're up.
So yeah, what I'm going to mention is a bit of a slight tangent, but there's for a long time I've wondered what the impact of chronology is on note taking, and there was piece of software developed by a gentleman named David Galertner from Yale, who's famous for having been threatened by the Unabomber. And he developed this thing, which he unfortunately patented, called Mirror Worlds. And it's essentially taking every file on your file system and just producing a continuous stream of everything in a chronological order. And it really caught my attention because I tend to think of things of like, when did this happen? When did I think about this? I know there was something back then, and I've tried to recreate that in Obsidian, and I think I can do it through data view by ordering every single note in the vault in chronological order. I haven't really put it into use, but it came to mind when I forget who mentioned, maybe it was Brendan who mentioned how ridiculous the index system is for Luhmann, and that it seems that nobody really has understood it. And I wonder to what extent maybe it's just simply chronology. I remember reading this book a few months ago and go back and look at it and make the connections. Anyway, just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, I think that's valuable, right? What headspace was I in when I, for the longest time, I thought that monologue about finding things, looking for everything in the world was from Douglas Adams, and it turns out it was from the Zero Effect, and it was the chronology that actually kind of clued me in to what that was. We'll go to Gregory, but I just wanted to mention, because I think that John, you had said something about where and when do you begin the linking? And I think that's an interesting question too, because I don't think that I've done a lot of real permanent note making, but I link my reading notes extensively. So I have this, kind of dense web of things that sort of point to each other, but without a sort of a deliberate through line or something. But maybe again, that's imposing top-down logic on it. Go ahead, Gregory.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, to the general question, does Ahrens sort of make the case for this kind of approach? I think he really does. In the early part of the book, I can remember the first time I read it about a year and a half ago. Just sitting there, and it was kind of a revelation. This whole approach that you could sort of link the ideas in a way that it's an organic part of the process of writing. And of course, that's how he embeds this idea, right? It's the idea is, how do you make writing easier, right? And so I don't think we want to lose sight of that larger context. But in that context, I think he does show that if you could implement the process in the rough way that Luhmann did, could be very helpful in increasing your sort of writing productivity. In terms of the reference system, I think it's important to remember that the numbers Luhmann used have no meaning whatsoever, right? They're just positions in a space, right? And so the index can reference any number on any card if that happens to be a reasonable entry point for whatever topic has emerged through that kind of cluster.
Yeah, that's the way I understand it too.
Yeah, and the other thing I think he points out that we often don't appreciate enough, at least if we're following these discussions on the internet and YouTube, is that there are actually two slip boxes. And I think, Dan, this sort of goes to your point. It sounds like you're saying you've been laboring mostly in the bibliographic slip box, what Aaron calls the bibliographic one, and not, converting, those insights you're recording in the bibliographic slip box into permanent atomic notes in the main slip box. And I can totally sympathize with that because I've run into the same problem in my attempts to begin to implement this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that I'm still unclear, and I'm thinking about, you know, maybe calling some things source notes in my own in my own vault, because there are, you know, pieces of data, and there are there are elements of, you know, historical narrative, right, that are not that I don't think of. You know, I tend to think of permanent notes as arguments, as ideas. And so maybe that's just a thing that I have to abandon, you know, in my own head, and realize that information, if I'm producing it and synthesizing it, can be a legitimate permanent note as well.
You know,
so I'm
on
struggling.
the point of linking, I just to finish the thought there, on the point of linking, I think it's important to recognize that there are two kinds of linking, because I think also this is not stressed going to this general point, right? You link simply by putting a note, by positioning a note sort of next to the note that comes before it. On page 20 of the book, you know, he points out that that's sort of was Luhmann's, in a sense, main form of linking. And what his number references, which we would call wiki links, I guess today, right, was a second form of linking. And I think too often we reduce linking to that one modality of the wiki link. And that causes the difficulty of trying to capture the development of a line of thinking.
Yeah, and I think Tracy was kind of exploring that in the vault a little bit, talking about, you know, kind of forward links, backward links, and sideways links. So maybe that's a fruitful area. Mark, what do you want to throw in?
So I come to this, you know, from again, from education and interest in e-portfolios and working in public. And so I'm one of my projects is trying to develop a taxonomy for lifelong learners. So I see there's a tension here between a spatial system and a meaningful or you know, a tagging, a meta tag type of system using language. And so that's, you know, this is what I want to be able to sort of sort out during this class is a good approach. Like, just to me, that's the same as the tension between a hierarchical file system and a graphic file system, right? Again, there's this tension between the hierarchical and the network. And it seems to me that we're moving in the direction of the network, and with the semantic web into a taxonomy. And then there are people talking about emerging taxonomies, which they used to call folksonomies. And so I'm wondering if there can't be that sort of system, you know, personal system, if I can't develop that, where there's not a rigid taxonomy, but there's just an awareness of an emerging tagging system as you go along, and then to use it in more of a graph type of a way rather than a hierarchical way to organize the material.
Yeah, it's almost it's kind of funny. I'm teaching a historical methods class this semester, and we were talking with another faculty colleague of mine, and we were talking in the class this week about cultural versus social history. We had done social history last week, and we're doing cultural history this week, and the idea that, you know, that it's almost inductive versus deductive reasoning, right? That in one case you are taking a bunch of data and you're generalizing from it, and in the other case, in a lot of, you know, and this is an oversimplification, of course, but you're taking, you know, sort of these anecdotes and you're kind of stringing them together and claiming that they can be generalized to, you know, to something bigger and more meaningful. So, you know, so maybe that's kind of part of the challenge, is finding a meeting place in the middle that kind of takes something from both of those things and is comfortable to work in individually. So there's stuff going on in there's a lot going on in the chat right now. But in the meantime, Chris, do you want to throw something in?
I'll apologize. My camera seems to be having issues this morning, but to circle back to a couple of points, one of my issues with this as a book is the difference between the descriptive and the proscriptive versions of what he's talking about. And I think he suffers a little from not delving into the historical piece of what's going on and where we've come from, because there definitely is a massive rich history there that he totally doesn't discuss. And then he tries to describe kind of as best as he can what's going on and what the end effect is. And assuredly he wrote the book in his own Zettelkasten, and that's how it grew out. But I don't think he tacitly says this book grew out of my note card file. But I think he actually does a pretty decent job of editing through it to hide the fact that it came from his note card file, which is with at least within German academia, I've seen people literally call out others for the fact that while you're reading their book or their journal article, you can physically see where one index card ended in their argument and the next one started, which I find hilarious.
And people have said that about Luhmann.
Yeah. But I think that kind of balancing that descriptive versus proscriptive is very hard. And I think this is probably one of the best written books or things in modern culture for what this practice is. And there are 8 million blog posts and probably 4 or 5 new ones I see every week that talk about this. And at best, they barely scratch the surface. So, I highly recommend that unless someone has spent hours and hours in the space and has been doing it for a year or two or more themselves, just ignore the article and move on. It's not worth it. It's kind of the thing I've discovered in the last 6 months. Somebody brought up the idea of his numbering or addressing system for his cards, or Luhmann specific, and there are certainly people who use it. In my reading, the closest I've come that I think was the inspiration for Luhmann's version was the housing address system used in Vienna in the 1600s. So the Viennese government had an issue of, when you're trying to do a census and create addresses for people, there are going to be pre-existing houses, but people will build new houses or new things, and they'll pop up in the middle of a block. So how do you renumber that block to add that address into the system? And that's a harder thing to do as cities and towns grow. And in some sense, Luhmann's numbering system almost exactly mirrors that of 17th century Vienna. And if somebody else can find a better version of what that is or what may have inspired it, but that is one of the earliest versions I've seen of how do you order, and it's not about ordering, it's simply about how do you assign a number to a new thing that pops up between two other things. So if you're a mathematician, it's the idea of you have the whole numbers on a number line, but there are other numbers that are slotted in between them. You have the rational numbers, the complex numbers, and there's an ordering or not between those types of numbers. And the more and more you can throw in there without screwing your system up, eventually you can do what topologists call making a system dense, meaning that you can get as close to something else as you want by staying within a small enough area of space. So over time, Luhmann's system becomes a dense one because he can add an infinite number of things in there. I think one of the other things that sparked an idea that somebody mentioned was the types of notes. And I think to a great extent, it's caught on a lot, but it's rare to see a pre-existing or other taxonomies on what the names of notes are. So I think he does a reasonable job of giving them names like fleeting notes and permanent notes and literature notes as kind of a broad spectrum, but even those I think can be broken down in terms of, and I think there are multiple axes of notes, both for the purpose they serve, the timeline that they serve. And I don't think we do a good enough job of describing those, because I think, as Dan pointed out, and one or two other people mentioned it, notes you take in a class that are just pure facts that you want to memorize, and you may put them into a spaced repetition system to help memorizing them being easier. At the end of the day, those are still fleeting notes because it's something you want to review over and know and consume and have. But then I have a space in my system for those, but they're kind of in a space that Ahrens would describe as fleeting notes. I'll use them for a while. There's a project purpose for them. But then once I've memorized the thing where I don't need it anymore, it's not a space in my system I'm going to visit often. So I kind of push it off to the side and kind of wipe it away into an archive. It's there if I still need it, and I could still link it into the bigger system. But it's spending more time working with, refining and linking notes to the permanent note space, where you're going to find way more value, particularly value over time. So it's, can I write a paragraph or two that's valuable enough as an interesting and unique idea in and of itself, that I can then link to other ideas and then create a space that I can traverse through. The best conception I've seen of that idea, Ward Cunningham, who is considered the godfather and creator of the wiki, has been playing around in some pretty rarefied space for the last 2 decades, and he's got a tool with a fun name called the Markov monkey. And so within his wiki, he's got a bunch of what one could consider permanent notes, although quite often they tend to be just basic facts or even throwaway fleeting notes. But he's got a system that will look at how all of his notes are linked and interlinked. And his Markov monkey will find paths through his system to create broader networks. But you could think of it as almost the same way if you were going to teach a kindergartner a basic science topic, you have to start with something and move to another thing that's related to that and create kind of a mesh network of knowledge that then creates a map in the child's mind. And you could move around and do these things randomly, but it makes it much harder to teach what that concept is. But if you can draw a specific line from A to Z, it's much easier for the child to not only understand it, but remember it, because they can link all those concepts together. And to some extent, that's what his Markov monkey does. It's just doing it thousands or millions of times over a much wider base of knowledge. And to some extent, that's what I think Luhmann and others who have used this system were doing when you decide, hey, I'm going to write a journal article, and it's going to be on this topic based on this card. So then they sit and look at their system, and what path would a Markov monkey take, or the optimal Markov monkey, I guess we could say, what would they take to go from a basic understanding of this area, if you're an academic, because you have to have some base to start from. How do we start from a very simple base and get to this complex idea I want to explain in the shortest path, or maybe the most optimal path? And then I'll take out all those cards and I'll arrange them in such a way that I now have a journal article that gets me from a base set of knowledge to this idea that I want to explain. But there are 1,000.
So that has a lot to do with scope as well. Yeah.
But those types of ideas are the ones that I don't see being written about and discussed by people like Ahrens in terms of what's the overall use of this. I think he does us a favor of saying, here's how you would write a paper. But in the book, he describes how you write that paper in reverse and breaks it down into steps. And then in doing so, he shows us that if you're taking, these smart notes along the way, the end result is you just have to sit and find that path through your prior notes to get to the end note that's the point of your paper. Writing smart notes along the way and linking them together is really how you get there.
Looks like there's some people queuing up behind you here. So Louis, and Joe, you want to. Louis, Joe, I think you were kind of in there, and then Jody and Miguel. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's fine.
Is it all right if I go next?
Yes, go.
Yeah, just quickly, as quickly as possible. Like, we've been talking a lot about the structure of these notes, and I think that's really important. I also want to say something about the practice of writing. What struck me, there was a story in the book about was it Richard Feynman, the physicist, saying that his somebody was asking him look at his notes, and he said the notes were his thinking. And there's a book by a Finnish architect called The Thinking Hand, in which he talks about designing a building by sketching. The practice, the actual physical act of sketching, is a way of thinking through the problem and the solution. And maybe this is, it goes back a little bit to what Chris said as well with the Markov monkey. Like, once you have a set of notes that are interlinked, when you start writing something on top of those notes and follow the links through, that's perhaps somewhere where we're actually thinking new things and our own thoughts. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's that if nothing else, right, just that spending time with those notes, and there's that video that at the tail end of it, at the 37th minute or whatever, I put it in the videos section. It actually shows him, sort of manipulating his notes and stuff, and just the idea that he sits with it for a long period of time, and he did claim, and it's well documented, that he said that he spends much more time tending the slip box than he does actually writing. Joe, did you want to throw something in there? You kind of put your hand up and down a couple times.
I was just thinking, like, if you had like a weekly review or like a midweek and a weekly review of all the notes that you take, and then go back and expand upon them, it might be a better way of trying to build out the notes that you did take. Because it seems like a lot of people are having the problem of like, hey, we take a lot of notes and we take them, they just sit there. It's like, okay, maybe if you block a certain period of time, like on a Wednesday evening or Saturday evening or something like that, and just go through and actually be like, hey, is this worth keeping? Is this worth not keeping? Do I want to expand upon it? And can I link it to something? Because I seem to run into that problem a lot of, I have too much that I took in my fleeting notes section. And then it's just like, I go back to it, they say 2 days later, even though you made the notes on it, it's just like, okay, I can't link it to anything. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to toss it out. So, so having that weekly time to actually go back and link it to everything and actually use Obsidian as the way it's meant to be used, of trying to link your thoughts together and then bringing it through the structure. I mean, keeping, maybe not having everything like in the number system, or he has it, or having loosely categorized folders. Because, there is a time and place for a folder, but if you have it loosely categorized, you can still link it across folders because you've had the idea. But if you keep things in somewhat of a subsection, you'll be able to have that system kind of build out the way that you want to build it out, instead of forcing the way your own system is to someone else's system. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting bogged down, is they're trying to mirror someone else's system and have their way of thinking meet your way of thinking. It's like, that's just not the way that our minds all work together. So yeah, that's what I have thought on it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the idea of, and I would love to create a discipline for myself like that, where I did have a weekly review and I did try to get to, kind of zero inbox, to put it in GTD terminology. I'm terrible at getting to zero inbox in GTD, I will say. So it's a work in progress. Jody.
Yeah, I guess for me, my struggle with the book thus far is I like to be very practical, and how do I take concepts like these fleeting notes, these literature notes, these permanent notes, and how do I make that more concrete? What kind of system, what kind of workflow do I utilize? And so, like I mentioned, I read a lot, right? And I try to do that mainly on Kindle app. And, so I ended up with a lot of highlights. And one of the things I've been thinking about recently with Readwise is, when you're highlighting something in Kindle, you can actually add a note there. And I'm wondering, like, from a workflow perspective, is that where I should be creating like that literature note at the time that I've done this highlight? Because again, I'm really struggling with the fact that, it's so easy to highlight stuff now. It's so easy to, to capture, right? We've created the monster, of the ability to capture. And there's 100 different apps, that will let you capture. So collection isn't the problem. It's really the think time. And so I'm struggling with that over how do I make time for that, right? Because, it's like I have a full-time job and, I wish reading were my life, right? And I could just sit and think and, and process what I've read, but that's not real life. And so I don't know if I'm completely like shortcutting the entire process or short-circuiting the entire process. It's probably a better phrase. By not trying to do this at the time of capture. And I honestly, I'm not sure where the book would speak to that, or Ahrens would speak to that, right? I'm curious what others might think.
Yeah, I've actually started occasionally double bracketing stuff when it comes up, either when I'm making the notes in Kindle or in Hypothesis, which Readwise also sweeps in for me, or when I'm reviewing them, when it gives me the 15 a day to review, sometimes, I'll just double bracket something. But I still, I think that, like you're saying, Jody, the problem, the choke point that I have is that then once it gets swept into my system, I've got to do something with that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Miguel.
Just a quick mention on the idea of that Markov monkey in that Chris was referring to. There is a plugin in Obsidian called Journey. So Journey will allow you to say, okay, here's a beginning note and here's an end note. It's not exactly the same thing, but it will draw an optimal path between both of those. Just wanted to point that out.
And it gives you random ones occasionally too, if you say surprise me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that is cool. I thought of that, but I always wondered when I was using it whether that was, if that might be the shortest distance between those 2 points, but maybe there's a more interesting path between them as well.
Undoubtedly, yeah. But then you get into a parallel set of problems. So that Markov monkey, for example, may come up with an optimal path according to a certain set of rules, but it may not be the one that you want.
Right. There are always assumptions built in. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, I think it was something that Joe said, and the other idea, I forgot who said it, about taxonomies. Constructing a folder system, and that of course leads into the map of content. Are these systems, and I'm not sure exactly how they're described in the book, but are these systems a sort of bottom-up kind of like the way you would do qualitative analysis, where you take your data and then generate concepts to organize the data? Or are they a top-down folder system, which I've always had somewhat confusion about the way that Linking Your Thinking presents it, because it's always a finished product, but I don't know how they've derived. So is it bottom up or top down?
Right. So that's a really good question. And is the map of content, are we thinking that it's equivalent to what Ahrens is calling Luhmann's index? I mean, only very recently did I even make a map of content, and it was entirely arbitrary for, in my personal vault. And so it has, so it was just things that I was looking at each note and I was thinking, okay, I need a home for this. What am I going to call it? But even that, I don't know if that's, if that then sort of has frozen me in that moment and prevented me from a new discovery, right? Stan, what do you want to throw in?
Oh, well, I'm not sure how to make this coherent or not. One of the things that I always had trouble with getting things done, back in the paper and pencil days, or even early computer days, was, choosing what the next action was. It's, like making that decision. What was, it was like, there was too much mental effort spent on that. And I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Torin, who mentioned Scott Shepard's videos on what he called the anti-net, ANTI, but that's really a mnemonic for if you watch his videos, it's really as he's trying to be true to form, to what he believes Luhmann's Zettelkasten were, and I don't remember it all, and my notes are upstairs. With N is numeric, I think, and T is textual, perhaps. If you watch, I was amused at watching one of his videos, and it's showing Scott trying to place one of his notes in the slip box, and he's like searching and searching and searching and searching and searching. It's like all this mental effort, to try to place it, and it just reminded me of the getting things done problem that I had. And the one advantage we have, I guess my point is, one advantage we have with more current tools that we have available, and maybe we can think about, I notice we're running out of time. It's not just links and backlinks that we have, but we also have tags. And of course, there are folders that we have available within our vaults. So we have 3 different ways of, helping us organize things. And that, I don't worry about folders personally, but I do make judicious use of tags as well as links. And of course, the backlinks via breadcrumbs, work very nicely. But there was a very nice description of when to use links versus tags given on one of the Tiddlywiki tutorials by Soren Bjornstad. And I thought it might be nice for us to spend a little bit of time, or we don't have to do it during one of the weekly sessions, and maybe you could do it offline, or, you know, I wouldn't even mind digging it up, you know, to take advantage. But, you know, for me, it was a little bit liberating. And there was a lot less friction in being able to implement the Zettelkasten methodology, to be able to do things incrementally via a fleeting note, or incrementally via a literature note, and then add tags via the tag methodology, or add a link via the link methodology. So there was a very finite set of things I had to learn, not the anti-net kind of school of thought, or getting things done.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll make a page in the vault. Somebody put in a list of things from the previous book club that were related readings about. I think it was about previous systems. But yeah, I think that some of this material would be kind of good to compare and contrast. Chris, and then Gregory, and it looks like that's probably you guys will probably wrap us up.
Sorry, trying to turn a video off that popped up. Going back to your question, Dan, about the idea of maps of content, to some extent, I find it horribly well defined for the purpose of what Zettelkasten or these note-taking systems are meant to do. And it's a fun marketing term, and I see it mostly coming out of one or two specific people who are selling services, and it can be a helpful tool, but you're not going to see it. It's something that exists within the system, but exists in two different spots, I think, in terms of the technical way, or the simplest way that Ahrens describes it. So one of them is, almost everybody who's done this has had an index of some sort within their system, which is a listing or a collection, and we might think of it as a third slip box, or Luhmann's third slip box, which is probably the least spoken of. But it's one with all the head words or topic headings or tags or categories, whatever you want to call that taxonomy. So you may have, let's say from our last book club, a heading of anthropology, which is an incredibly broad one. So you might have, in your term, a map of content for that index heading. And here's all the things within my thing that link to that, which it becomes an interesting way to categorize and aggregate it all and have it cross-linked. And that's useful, as long as you don't have, if you're a professional anthropologist, that's probably the worst thing you could do, because then there's going to be so much in it, it becomes useless. So that's one of the functions that a map of content does. It's really here's an index card subject heading that links to all the things related to it. But then the other instantiation of that Ahrens also uses is a project note, or here's a space where I'm working on a particular project and all the cards and notes that relate to this project are linked from within it. And then you can create a hierarchy or kind of a workflow or a table of contents of what that looks like. And then when you're done with that project, you throw it away and you move it outside of your systems, so to speak. But
see, that's where I disagree with them. I wouldn't get rid of it because I think that's a path through the forest, but I wouldn't.
I would keep it, but I would put it outside of the part of the system that I'm working in and playing in on a regular basis, if that makes sense. So it's not, it's there, but it's archival material I may view, 10 years down the road, but I'm not going to look at it even twice a year, maybe once I'm done with it.
Right. But if I write an essay or an article or a book out of it, then that actually also becomes another source, right? But in any case, Gregory, do you want to throw something in here?
Yeah, sure. Just a couple of quick reactions. Going back to what Joe was saying, I think it's good to sort of borrow this term from computer science of refactoring, right? It seems to, capture what we need to do to transform a fleeting node or a literature note into the permanent notes, right? Because the fleeting notes and the literature notes might be fairly substantial, multiple paragraphs, and not atomic, right? And so then breaking those notes, into the atomic notes is what I would, like to borrow that term of refactoring for. Going to a point that Jody was making about, how to think about highlights, and with Readwise, people seem to be importing them into their Obsidian, vaults. I would think of a highlight as a kind of fleeting note embedded in a literature note. And I think the highlight, the quote, in other words, has to itself be, I guess we'll call it, translated or refractored. Also, maybe we can make it have a double meaning there, into an actual literature note, which has to be expressing the thought in your own idea, right? And then that literature note has to be refactored into an atomic note, right, within the main slip box into the, So anyhow, just a thought about that. On map of contents, I'm sympathetic with what Chris just said. I don't think the way it's understood in the typical internet conversation, web conversation, sort of inspired by Nick Milo's linking your thinking. I really think that's sort of antithetical to the core idea of the Zettelkasten, because at least the way it's expressed and implemented by a lot of people on the web, it's really imposing a top-down structure, right? Because they code it into 100, 200, 300. So you're imposing sort of inflexible categories. I've tried to avoid that. It's not an index, that's clear. Chris was saying how important the index is, and it absolutely is, but it's not a map of content. I think Ahrens describes it nicely as a kind of an organization of links, which is itself emergent and is subject to evolution, right? And it does have to be distinguished from the project notes, which is outside the main slip box, which is trying to organize things for the purposes of the project, not for the sort of long-term interaction with the slip box. And finally, I just say, Stan mentions this fellow Scott. I've also seen some of his videos, and it's a heroic effort to try to recreate Luhmann, and I don't know what to make of it yet. So, but it does sort of point out what Ahrens, says, but maybe doesn't stress enough. That a lot of, maybe a large part of your time is spent just thinking about where a note should be positioned, and maybe we could sort of try to, make that more concrete for us, because that's kind of, once you've refractored the idea into an atomic note, the key thing, and that's going to give it real value in the future, is knowing where to place it and where then to link it from that position to other notes. If you don't do that correctly, the project, the whole concept of the Zettelkasten fails. Anyhow, thanks.
I think that's. Stan, I'll give you a chance in a sec, but I think that's almost kind of an interesting place to kind of almost stop, because we are over time. for next time, I think, and maybe in the vault in over the course of this week, maybe we can think, because we have dealt, pretty much with kind of our impressions of the chapters. We haven't talked as much about our own kind of workflows and processes. And so maybe for next time, we can start with that and talk about, how we think we want to either using Ahrens's suggestions or not, to arrange ideas and facts and observations into trains of thought, using, that will be actually useful to us, and that we can use to produce whatever output it is that we imagine, we're planning. And maybe we can talk about those in the vault in terms of these things like fleeting notes and literature notes and permanent notes and projects and all of this stuff that we've been talking about. So that would be kind of what I would hope that we could start to talk about. Maybe start to show and several people have already been in their individual notes folders, kind of showing their process and demoing that, which has been really, for me, super valuable. So I've already picked up a couple that I've already stolen a couple of ideas to put in my own template for my permanent notes. Stan, do you want to close us out here?
Very, very quickly. I noticed you're recording.
Yep.
Will there be a copy of the chat also, so we can go back to?
Yes, there was a lot of good stuff in the chat. Yeah, so yeah. I'll post the chat log, and actually that I can just copy into Markdown and put it on a page, and then I will make I'll process the video and put it up on YouTube.
Very good, thank you.
You bet. So, any final thoughts before we go? Cool. Well, I will put that. I will, as I said, make a further reading kind of a page inside of the vault, because Stan, I think that that article you were mentioning and a bunch of the other ones that were mentioned in the chat, I think will be kind of fun to take a look at. So thanks. I thought this went pretty well this morning. Thank you everybody for taking the time. This was a lot of fun, and I will go back to the I'll go back to the vault. I did notice I have it open to the side here, and I did notice that things are happening in it as we've been talking. So that's been fun. So thanks very much, and I'll see you in a week.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.